Book 14, Chapters 1 through 3 of the Antiquities of the Jews, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Antiquities of the Jews, Volume 3, by Flavius Josephus. Translated by William Whiston. Book 14, Chapters 1 through 3. Book 14, containing the interval of 32 years, from the death of Queen Alexandra to the death of Antigonus. Chapter 1. The war between Aristobulus and Hyrcanus about the kingdom, and how they made an agreement that Aristobulus should be king and Hyrcanus live a private life, as also how Hyrcanus a little afterwards was persuaded by Antipater to fly to Aretas. We have related the affairs of Queen Alexandra and her death in the foregoing book, and will now speak of what followed and was connected with those histories, declaring, before we proceed, that we have nothing so much at heart as this, that we may admit no facts, either through ignorance or laziness, for we are upon the history and explication of such things as the greatest part are unacquainted withal, because of their distance from our times, and we aim to do it with a proper beauty of style, so far as that is derived from proper words harmonically disposed, and from such ornaments of speech also as may contribute to the pleasure of our readers, that they may entertain the knowledge of what we write with some agreeable satisfaction and pleasure. But the principal scope that authors ought to aim at above all the rest is to speak accurately, and to speak truly, for the satisfaction of those that are otherwise unacquainted with such transactions, and obliged to believe what these writers inform them of. Hyrcanus then began his high priesthood on the 3rd year of the 177th Olympiad, when Quintus Hortensius and Quintus Metellus, who was called Metellus of Crete, were consuls at Rome, when presently Aristobulus began to make war against him. And as it came to a battle with Hyrcanus at Jericho, many of his soldiers deserted him, and went over to his brother, upon which Hyrcanus fled into the citadel, where Aristobulus's wife and children were imprisoned by their mother, as we have said already, and attacked and overcame those his adversaries that had fled thither, and lay within the walls of the temple. So when he had sent a message to his brother about agreeing the matters between them, he lay aside his enmity to him on these conditions, that Aristobulus should be king, that he should live without intermeddling with public affairs, and quietly enjoy the estate he had acquired. When they had agreed upon these terms in the temple, and had confirmed the agreement with oaths, and the giving one another their right hands, and embracing one another in the sight of the whole multitude, they departed, the one Aristobulus to the palace, and Hyrcanus as a private man to the former house of Aristobulus. But there was a certain friend of Hyrcanus, an Idumean, called Antipater, who was very rich, and in his nature an active and seditious man, who was at enmity with Aristobulus, and had differences with him on account of his goodwill to Hyrcanus. It is true that Nicolaus of Damascus says, that Antipater was of the stock of the principal Jews who came out of Babylon into Judea, but that assertion of his was to gratify Herod, who was his son, and who, by certain revolutions of fortune, came afterwards to be king of the Jews, whose history we shall give you in its proper place hereafter. However, this Antipater was at first called Antipas, and that was his father's name also, of whom they relate this, that King Alexander and his wife made him general of all Idumea, and that he made a league of friendship with those Arabians and Gazites and Ascalonites that were of his own party, and had by many and large presents made them his fast friends. But now this younger Antipater was suspicious of the power of Aristobulus, and was afraid of some mischief he might do him, because of his hatred to him. So he stirred up the most powerful of the Jews, and talked against him to them privately, and said that it was unjust to overlook the conduct of Aristobulus, who had gotten the government unrighteously, and ejected his brother out of it, who was the elder, and ought to retain what belonged to him by prerogative of his birth. And the same speeches he perpetually made to Hyrcanus, and told him that his own life would be in danger unless he guarded himself, and got shut of Aristobulus, for he said that the friends of Aristobulus omitted no opportunity of advising him to kill him, as being then, and not before, sure to retain his principality. Hyrcanus gave no credit to these words of his, as being of a gentle disposition, and one that did not easily admit of calumnies against other men. This temper of his not disposing him to meddle with public affairs, and want of spirit, occasioned him to appear to spectators to be degenerous and unmanly, while Aristobulus was of a contrary temper, an active man, and one of a great and generous soul. Since therefore Antipater saw that Hyrcanus did not attend to what he said, he never ceased day by day to charge rain crimes upon Aristobulus, and to calumniate before him, as if he had a mind to kill him. And so, by urging him perpetually, he advised him, and persuaded him to fly to Aretas, the king of Arabia, and promised, that if he would comply with his advice, he would also himself assist him, and go with him. When Hyrcanus heard this, he said that it was for his advantage to fly away to Aretas. Now Arabia is a country that borders upon Judea. However, Hyrcanus sent Antipater first to the king of Arabia, in order to receive assurances from him, that when he should come in the manner of a supplicant to him, he would not deliver him up to his enemies. So Antipater, having received such assurances, returned to Hyrcanus in Jerusalem. A while after he took Hyrcanus, and stole out of the city by night, and went a great journey, and came and brought him to the city called Petra, where the palace of Aretas was. And as he was a very familiar friend of that king, he persuaded him to bring Hyrcanus into Judea, and this persuasion he continued every day without any intermission. He also proposed to make him presents on that account. At length he prevailed with Aretas in his suit. Moreover, Hyrcanus promised him that when he had been brought thither and had received his kingdom, he would restore that country, and those 12 cities which his father Alexander had taken from the Arabians, which were these: Medaba, Nabolo, Libias, Tharabasa, Agala, Athon, Zoar, Oron, Marissa, Ruda, Lusa, and Oruba. Chapter 2. How Aretas and Hyrcanus made an expedition against Aristobulus, and besieged Jerusalem, and how Scaurus the Roman general raised the siege, concerning the death of Onias. After these promises had been given to Aretas, he made an expedition against Aristobulus with an army of 50,000 horse and foot, and beat him in the battle. And when after that victory many went over to Hyrcanus as deserters, Aristobulus was left desolate, and fled to Jerusalem. Upon which the king of Arabia took all his army, and made an assault upon the temple, and besieged Aristobulus therein, the people still supporting Hyrcanus, and assisting him in the siege, while none but the priests continued with Aristobulus. So Aretas united the forces of the Arabians and of the Jews together, and pressed on the siege vigorously. As this happened at the time when the feast of unleavened bread was celebrated, which we call the Passover, the principal men among the Jews left the country and fled into Egypt. Now there was one whose name was Onias, a righteous man he was, and beloved of God, who, in a certain drought, had prayed to God to put an end to the intense heat, and whose prayers God had heard, and had sent them rain. This man had hid himself, because he saw that this sedition would last a great while. However, they brought him to the Jewish camp, and desired, that as by his prayers he had once put an end to the drought, so he would in a like manner make imprecations on Aristobulus and those of his faction. And when, upon his refusal, and the excuses that he made, he was still by the multitude compelled to speak, he stood up in the midst of them, and said, O God, the King of the whole world, since those that stand now with me are thy people, and those that are besieged are also thy priests, I beseech thee that thou wilt neither hearken to the prayers of those against these, nor bring to effect what these pray against those. Whereupon such wicked Jews as stood about him, as soon as he had made this prayer, stoned him to death. But God punished them immediately for this their barbarity, and took vengeance of them for the murder of Onias, in the manner following. When the priests and Aristobulus were besieged, it happened that the feast called the Passover was come, at which it is our custom to offer a great number of sacrifices to God. But those that were with Aristobulus wanted sacrifices, and desired that their countrymen without would furnish them with such sacrifices, and assured them that they should have as much money for them as they should desire. And when they required them to pay 1,000 drachmae for each head of cattle, Aristobulus and the priests willingly undertook to pay for them accordingly, and those within let down the money over the walls, and gave it to them. But when the others had received it, they did not deliver the sacrifices, but arrived at that height of wickedness as to break the assurances they had given, and to be guilty of impiety towards God, by not furnishing those that wanted them with sacrifices. And when the priests found they had been cheated, and that the agreements they had made were violated, they prayed to God that he would avenge them on their countrymen. Nor did he delay that their punishment, but sent a strong and vehement storm of wind, that destroyed the fruits of the whole country, till a modius of wheat was then bought for 11 drachmae. In the meantime Pompey sent Scaurus into Syria, while he himself was in Armenia, and making war with Tigranes. But when Scaurus was come to Damascus, and found that Lowlands and Metellus had newly taken the city, he came himself hastily into Judea. And when he was come thither, ambassadors came to him, both from Aristobulus and Hyrcanus, and both desired he would assist them. And when both of them promised to give him money, Aristobulus 400 talents, and Hyrcanus no less, he accepted of Aristobulus's promise, for he was rich and had a great soul, and desired to obtain nothing but what was moderate, whereas the other was poor and tenacious, and made incredible promises in hopes of greater advantages. For it was not the same thing to take a city that was exceeding strong and powerful, as it was to eject out of the country some fugitives, with a great number of Mabateans, who were no very warlike people. He therefore made an agreement with Aristobulus for the reasons before mentioned, and took his money and raised the siege, and ordered Aretas to depart, or else he should be declared an enemy to the Romans. So Scaurus returned to Damascus again, and Aristobulus with a great army made war with Aretas and Hyrcanus, and fought them at a place called Papyron, and beat them in the battle, and slew about 6,000 of the enemy, with whom fell Phalion also, the brother of Antipater. Chapter 3. How Aristobulus and Hyrcanus came to Pompey in order to argue who ought to have the kingdom, and how upon the plight of Aristobulus to the fortress Alexandrium, Pompey led his army against him, and ordered him to deliver up the fortresses whereof he was possessed. A little afterwards Pompey came to Damascus, and marched over to Celesyria, at which time there came ambassadors to him from all Syria and Egypt, and out of Judea also. For Aristobulus had sent him a great present, which was a golden vine of the value of 500 talents. Now Strabo of Cappadocia mentions this present in these words: There came also an embassage out of Egypt, and a crown of the value of 4,000 pieces of gold. And out of Judea there came another, whether you call it a vine or a garden. They call the thing Terpole, the delight. However, we ourselves saw that the present reposited at Rome, in the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus, with this inscription: The gift of Alexander, the king of the Jews. It was valued at 500 talents, and the report is that Aristobulus, the governor of the Jews, sent it. In a little time afterwards came ambassadors again to him, Antipater from Hyrcanus, and Nicodemus from Aristobulus, which last also accused such as had taken bribes, first Gabinius, and then Scaurus, the one 300 talents, and the other 400, by which procedure he made these two his enemies, besides those he had before. And when Pompey had ordered those that had controversies with one another to come to him in the beginning of the spring, he brought his army out of their winter quarters, and marched into the country of Damascus. And as he went along, he demolished the citadel that was at Apamea, which Antiochus Cyzicensis had built, and took cognizance of the country of Ptolemy Menenius, a wicked man, and not less so than Dionysius of Tripoli, who had been beheaded, who was also his relation by marriage. Yet did he buy off the punishment of his crimes for 1,000 talents, with which money Pompey paid the soldiers their wages. He also conquered the place called Lysis, of which Silas a Jew was tyrant. And when he had passed over the cities of Heliopolis and Chalcis, and got over the mountain which is on the limit of Coelesyria, he came from Pella to Damascus, and there it was that he heard the causes of the Jews, and of their governors Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, who were at difference with one another, as also of the nation against them both, which did not desire to be under kingly government, because the form of government they received from their forefathers was that of subjection to the priests of that god whom they worshipped. And they complained, that though these two were the posterity of priests, yet they did seek to change the government of their nation to another form, in order to enslave them. Hyrcanus complained that although he were the elder brother, he was deprived of the prerogative of his birth by Aristobulus, and that he had but a small part of the country under him, Aristobulus having taken away the rest from him by force. He also accused him that the incursions which had been made into their neighbors' countries, and the piracies that had been at sea, were owing to him, and that the nation would not have revolted unless Aristobulus had been a man given to violence and disorder. And there were no fewer than 1,000 Jews of the best esteem among them who confirmed this accusation, which confirmation was procured by Antipater. But Aristobulus alleged against him that it was Hyrcanus's own temper, which was inactive, and on that account contemptible, which caused him to be deprived of the government, and that for himself he was necessitated to take it upon him, for fear lest it should be transferred to others. and that as to his title of king it was no other than what his father had taken before him. He also called for witnesses of what he said some persons who were both young and insolent, whose purple garments, fine heads of hair, and other ornaments were detested by the court, and which they appeared in not as though they were to plead their cause in a court of justice, but as if they were marching in a pompous procession. When Pompey had heard the causes of these two, and had condemned Aristobulus for his violent procedure, he then spake civilly to them, and sent them away, and told them that when he came again into their country he would settle all their affairs, after he had first taken a view of the affairs of the Nabateans. In the meantime he ordered them to be quiet, and treated Aristobulus civilly, lest he should make the nation revolt, and hinder his return, which yet Aristobulus did, for without expecting any further determination which Pompey had promised them, he went to the city Delius, and thence marched into Judea. At this behavior Pompey was angry, and taking with him that army which he was leading against the Nabateans, and the auxiliaries that came from Damascus, and the other parts of Syria, with the other Roman legions which he had with him, he made an expedition against Aristobulus. But as he passed by Pella and Scythopolis, he came to Corim, which is the first entrance into Judea when one passes over the midland countries, where he came to a most beautiful fortress that was built on top of a mountain called Alexandrium, whither Aristobulus had fled, and thence Pompey sent his commands to him, that he should come to him. Accordingly, at the persuasions of many that he would not make war with the Romans, he came down, and when he had disputed with his brother about the right to the government, he went up again to the citadel, as Pompey gave him leave to do. And he did this 2 or 3 times, as flattering himself with the hopes of having the kingdom granted him, so that he still pretended he would obey Pompey in whatsoever he commanded, although at the same time he retired to his fortress, that he might not depress himself too low, and that he might be prepared for war in case it should prove as he feared, that Pompey would transfer the government to Hyrcanus. But when Pompey enjoined Aristobulus to deliver up the fortresses he held, and to send an injunction to their governors under his own hand for that purpose, for they had been forbidden to deliver them up upon any other commands, he submitted indeed to do so, but still he retired in displeasure to Jerusalem, and made preparation for war. A little after this, certain persons came out of Pontus, and informed Pompey, as he was on the way, in conducting his army against Aristobulus, that Mithridates was dead, and was slain by his son Pharmaces. End of Book 14, chapters 1 through 3.
Book 14, chapters 4 through 6 of the Antiquities of the Jews, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bill Mosley. The Antiquities of the Jews, Volume 3 by Flavius Josephus. Translated by William Whiston. Book 14, chapters 4 through 6. Chapter 4. How Pompey, when the citizens of Jerusalem shut their gates against him, besieged the city, and took it by force, as also what other things he did in Judea. Now when Pompey had pitched his camp at Jericho, where the palm tree grows, and that balsam which is an ointment of all the most precious, which upon any incision made in the wood with a sharp stone distills out thence like a juice, he marched in the morning to Jerusalem. Hereupon Aristobulus repented of what he was doing, and came to Pompey, had promised to give him money, and received him into Jerusalem, and desired that he would leave off the war, and do what he pleased peaceably. So Pompey, upon his entreaty, forgave him, and sent Gabinius and soldiers with him to receive the money and the city. Yet was no part of this performed, but Gabinius came back, being both excluded out of the city, and receiving none of the money promised, because Aristobulus's soldiers would not permit the agreements to be executed. At this Pompey was very angry, and put Aristobulus in prison, and came himself to the city, which was strong on every side, except the north, which was not so well fortified, for there was a broad and deep ditch that encompassed the city and included within it the temple, which was itself encompassed about with a very strong stone wall. Now there was a sedition of the men that were within the city, who did not agree what was to be done in their present circumstances, while some thought it best to deliver up the city to Pompey. But Aristobulus's party exhorted them to shut the gates, because he was kept in prison. Now these prevented the others, and seized upon the temple, and cut off the bridge which reached from it to the city, and prepared themselves to abide a siege. But the others admitted Pompey's army in, and delivered up both the city and the king's palace to him. So Pompey sent his lieutenant Piso with an army, and placed garrisons both in the city and in the palace to secure them, and fortified the houses that joined to the temple, and all those which were more distant and without it. And in the first place, he offered terms of accommodation to those within. But when they would not comply with what was desired, he encompassed all the places thereabout with a wall, wherein Hyrcanus did gladly assist him on all occasions. But Pompey pitched his camp within the wall on the north part of the temple, where it was most practicable, but even on that side there were great towers, and a ditch had been dug, and a deep valley begirt it round about. For on the parts towards the city were precipices, and the bridge on which Pompey had gotten in was broken down. However, a bank was raised day by day, with a great deal of labor, while the Romans cut down materials for it from the places round about. And when this bank was sufficiently raised, and the ditch filled up, though but poorly, by reason of its immense depth, he brought his mechanical engines and battering rams from Tyre, and placing them on the bank, he battered the temple with the stones that were thrown against it. And had it not been our practice from the days of our forefathers to rest on the seventh day, this bank could never have been perfected, by reason of the opposition the Jews would have made. For though our law gives us leave then to defend ourselves against those that begin to fight with us and assault us, yet does it not permit us to meddle with our enemies while they do anything else. Which thing, when the Romans understood on those days which we call Sabbath, they threw nothing at the Jews, nor came to any pitched battle with them, but raised up their earthen banks, and brought their engines into such forwardness that they might do execution the next day. And anyone may hence learn how very great piety we exercise towards God, and the observance of his laws, since the priests were not at all hindered from their sacred ministrations by their fear during this siege, but did still twice a day, in the morning and about the 9th hour, offer their sacrifices on the altar, nor did they omit those sacrifices if any melancholy accident happened by the stones that were thrown among them. For although the city was taken on the 3rd month, on the day of the fast, upon the 179th Olympiad, when Caius Antonius and Marcus Tullius Cicero were consuls, and the enemy then fell upon them, and cut the throats of those that were in the temple, yet could not those that offered the sacrifices be compelled to run away, neither by the fear they were in of their own lives, nor by the number that were already slain, as thinking it better to suffer whatever came upon them at their very altars, than to omit anything that their laws required of them. And that this is not a mere brag, or an encomium to manifest a degree of our piety that was false, but is the real truth, I appeal to those that have written of the acts of Pompey, and among them to Strabo and Nicholas of Damascus, and besides these two, Titus Flavius, the writer of the Roman history, who will bear witness to this thing. But when the battering engine was brought near, the greatest of the towers was shaken by it and fell down, and broke down a part of the fortifications. So the enemy poured in apace, and Cornelius Faustus, the son of Sylla, with his soldiers, first of all ascended the wall, and next to him Furius the centurion, with those that followed on the other part, while Fabius, who was also a centurion, ascended it in the middle, with a great body of men after him. But now all was full of slaughter, some of the Jews being slain by the Romans, and some by one another. Nay, some there were who threw themselves down the precipices, or put fire to their houses, and burnt them, as not able to bear the miseries they were under. Of the Jews there fell 12,000, but of the Romans very few. Absalom, who was at once both uncle and father-in-law to Aristobulus, was taken captive, and no small enormities were committed about the temple itself, which in former ages had been inaccessible, and seen by none. For Pompey went into it, and not a few of those that were with him also, and saw all that which it was unlawful for any other men to see, but only for the high priests. There were in that temple the golden table, the holy candlestick, and the pouring vessels, and a great quantity of spices, and besides these there were among the treasures 2,000 talents of sacred money. Yet did Pompey touch nothing of all this, on account of his regard to religion, and in this point also he acted in a manner that was worthy of his virtue. The next day he gave order to those that had the charge of the temple to cleanse it, and to bring what offerings the law required to God, and restored the high priesthood to Hyrcanus, both because he had been useful to him in other respects, and because he hindered the Jews in the country from giving Aristobulus any assistance in his war against him. He also cut off those that had been the authors of that war, and bestowed proper rewards on Faustus, and those others that mounted the wall with such alacrity. And he made Jerusalem tributary to the Romans, and took away those cities of Celesyria, which the inhabitants of Judea had subdued, and put them under the government of the Roman president, and confined the whole nation, which had elevated itself so high before, within its own bounds. Moreover, he rebuilt Gadara, which had been demolished a little before, to gratify Demetrius of Gadara, who was his freedman, and restored the rest of the cities, Hippos, and Scythopolis, and Pella, and Dios, and Samaria, as also Marissa, and Ashdod, and Jamnia, and Arethusa, to their own inhabitants. These were in the inland parts, besides those that had been demolished, and also of the maritime cities, Gaza, and Joppa, and Dora, and Strato's tower, which last Herod rebuilt after a glorious manner, and adorned with havens and temples, and changed its name to Caesarea. All these Pompey left in a state of freedom, and joined them to the province of Syria. Now the occasions of this misery which came upon Jerusalem were Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, by raising a sedition one against the other. For now we lost our liberty, and became subject to the Romans, and were deprived of that country which we had gained by our arms from the Syrians, and were compelled to restore it to the Syrians. Moreover, the Romans exacted of us in a little time above 10,000 talents, and the royal authority, which was a dignity formerly bestowed on those that were high priests, by the right of their family, became the property of private men. But of these matters we shall treat in their proper places. Now Pompey committed Celesyria as far as the river Euphrates in Egypt, to Scaurus with 2 Roman legions, and then went away to Cilicia and made haste to Rome. He also carried bound along with him Aristobulus and his children, for he had 2 daughters and as many sons, the one of which ran away, but the younger, Antigonus, was carried to Rome, together with his sisters. Chapter 5. How Scaurus made a league of mutual assistance with Aretas, and what Gabinius did in Judea, after he had conquered Alexander the son of Aristobulus. Scaurus made now an expedition against Patria in Arabia, and set on fire all the places round about it, because of the great difficulty of access to it. And as his army was pinched by famine, Antipater furnished him with corn out of Judea, and with whatever else he wanted, and this at the command of Hyrcanus. And when he was sent to Aretas, as an ambassador by Scaurus, because he had lived with him formerly, he persuaded Aretas to give Scaurus a sum of money, to prevent the burning of his country, and undertook to be his surety for 300 talents. So Scaurus, upon these terms, ceased to make war any longer, which was done as much at Scaurus's desire as at the desire of Aretas. Some time after this, when Alexander the son of Aristobulus made an incursion into Judea, Gabinius came from Rome into Syria as commander of the Roman forces. He did many considerable actions, and particularly made war with Alexander, since Hyrcanus was not yet able to oppose his power, but was already attempting to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, which Pompey had overthrown, although the Romans, which were there, restrained him from that his design. However, Alexander went over all the country round about, and armed many of the Jews, and suddenly got together 10,000 armed footmen, and 1,500 horsemen, and fortified Alexandrium, a fortress near to Coram and Machaerus, near the mountains of Arabia. Gabinius therefore came upon him, having sent Marcus Antonius with other commanders before. These armed such Romans as followed them, and together with them such Jews as were subject to them, whose leaders were Pytholas and Malachus, and they took with them also their friends that were with Antipater, and met Alexander, while Gabinius himself followed with his legion. Hereupon Alexander retired to the neighborhood of Jerusalem, where they fell upon one another, and it came to a pitched battle, in which the Romans slew of their enemies about 3,000, and took a like number alive. At which time Gabinius came to Alexandrium, and invited those that were in it to deliver it up on certain conditions, and promised that then their former offenses should be forgiven. But as a great number of the enemy had pitched their camp before the fortress, whom the Romans attacked, Marcus Antonius fought bravely, and slew a great number, and seemed to come off with the greatest honor. So Gabinius left part of his army there, in order to take the place, and he himself went into other parts of Judea, and gave order to rebuild all the cities that he met with that had been demolished, on which time were rebuilt Samaria, Ashdod, Scythopolis, Anthedon, Raphia, and Dora, Marissa also, and Gaza, and not a few others besides. And as the men acted according to Gabinius's command, it came to pass that at this time these cities were securely inhabited, which had been desolate for a long time. When Gabinius had done thus in the country, he returned to Alexandrium, and when he urged on the siege of the place, Alexander sent an embassage to him, desiring that he would pardon his former offenses. He also delivered up the fortresses Hyrcania and Machaerus, and at last Alexandrium itself, which fortresses Gabinius demolished. But when Alexander's mother, who was of the side of the Romans, as having her husband and other children at Rome, came to him, he granted her whatsoever she asked, and when he had settled matters with her, he brought Hyrcanus to Jerusalem, and committed the care of the temple to him. And when he had ordained 5 councils, he distributed the nation into the same number of parts. So these councils governed the people. The first was at Jerusalem, the second at Gadara, the third at Amathus, the fourth at Jericho, and the fifth at Sepphoris in Galilee. So the Jews were now freed from monarchic authority and were governed by an aristocracy. Chapter 6. How Gabinius caught Aristobulus after he had fled from Rome, and sent him back to Rome again, and how the same Gabinius, as he returned out of Egypt, overcame Alexander and the Nabateans in battle. Now Aristobulus ran away from Rome to Judea, and set about the rebuilding of Alexandrium, which had been newly demolished. Hereupon Gabinius sent soldiers against him, ad for their commanders Sisenna, and Antonius, and Servilius, in order to hinder him from getting possession of the country, and to take him again. And indeed many of the Jews ran to Aristobulus on account of his former glory, as also because they should be glad of an innovation. Now there was one Pitholaus, a lieutenant at Jerusalem, who deserted to him with 1,000 men, although a great number of those that came to him were unarmed. And when Aristobulus had resolved to go to Machaerus, he dismissed those people, because they were unarmed, for they could not be useful to him in what actions he was going about. But he took with him 8,000 that were armed, and marched on. And as the Romans fell upon them severely, the Jews fought valiantly, but were beaten in the battle. And when they had fought with alacrity, but were overborne by the enemy, they were put to flight, of whom were slain about 5,000. And the rest, being dispersed, tried as well as they were able to save themselves. However, Aristobulus had with him still above 1,000, and with them he fled to Machaerus, and fortified the place, and though he had ill success, he still had good hope of his affairs. But when he had struggled against the siege for 2 days' time, and had received many wounds, he was brought as a captive to Gabinius, with his son Antigonus, who also fled with him from Rome. And this was the fortune of Aristobulus, who was sent back again to Rome, and was there retained in bonds, having been both king and high priest for 3 years and 6 months, and was indeed an eminent person, and one of a great soul. However, the Senate let his children go, upon Gabinius's writing to them that he had promised their mother so much, when she delivered up the fortresses to him, and accordingly they then returned into Judea. Now when Gabinius was making an expedition against the Parthians, and had already passed over Euphrates, he changed his mind, and resolved to return into Egypt in order to restore Ptolemy to his kingdom. This hath also been related elsewhere. However, Antipater supplied his army, which he sent against Archelaus, with corn and weapons and money. He also made those Jews who were above Pelusium his friends and confederates, and had been the guardians of the passes that led into Egypt. But when he came back out of Egypt, he found Syria in disorder, with seditions and troubles, for Alexander the son of Aristobulus, having seized on the government a second time by force, made many of the Jews revolt to him, and so he marched over the country with a great army, and slew all the Romans he could light upon, and proceeded to besiege the mountain called Gerizim, whither they had retreated. But when Gabinius found Syria in such a state, he sent Antipater, who was a prudent man, to those that were seditious, to try whether he could cure them of their madness, and persuade them to return to a better mind. And when he came to them, he brought many of them to a sound mind, and induced them to do what they ought to do. But he could not restrain Alexander, for he had an army of 30,000 Jews, and met Gabinius, and joining battle with him, was beaten, and lost 10,000 of his men about Mount Tabor. So Gabinius settled the affairs which belonged to the city of Jerusalem, as was agreeable to Antipater's inclination, and went against the Nabateans, and overcame them in battle. He also sent away in a friendly manner Mithridates and Orsanes, who were Parthian deserters, and came to him, though the report went abroad that they had run away from him. And when Gabinius had performed great and glorious actions in his management of the affairs of war, he returned to Rome, and delivered the government to Crassus. Now Nicolaus of Damascus and Strabo of Cappadocia both describe the expeditions of Pompey and Gabinius against the Jews, while neither of them say anything new which is not in the other. End of Book 14, chapters 4 through 6. Recording by Bill Mosley, Frelsburg, Texas, USA.
Book 14, Chapters 7 and 8 of the Antiquities of the Jews, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Antiquities of the Jews, Volume 3, by Flavius Josephus, translated by William Whiston. Book 14, Chapters 7 and 8. Chapter 7. How Crassus came into Judea and pillaged the temple, and then marched against the Parthians and perished with his army, and how Cassius obtained Syria, and put a stop to the Parthians, and then went up to Judea. Now Crassus, as he was going upon his expedition against the Parthians, came into Judea, and carried off the money that was in the temple, which Pompey had left, being 2,000 talents, and was disposed to spoil it of all the gold belonging to it, which was 8,000 talents. He also took a beam, which was made of solid beaten gold, of the weight of 300 minae, each of which weighed 2.5 pounds. It was the priest who was guardian of the sacred treasures, and whose name was Eleazar, that gave him this beam, not out of a wicked design, for he was a good and a righteous man, but being entrusted with the custody of the veils belonging to the temple, which were of admirable beauty, and of very costly workmanship, and hung down from this beam, when he saw that Crassus was busy in gathering money, and was in fear for the entire ornaments of the temple, he gave him this beam of gold as a ransom for the whole, but this not till he had given his oath that he would remove nothing else out of the temple, but be satisfied with this only, which he should give him, being worth many 10,000 shekels. Now this beam was contained in a wooden beam that was hollow, but was known to no others. But Eleazar alone knew it. Yet did Crassus take away this beam, upon the condition of touching nothing else that belonged to the temple, and then brake his oath, and carried away all the gold that was in the temple. And let no one wonder that there was so much wealth in our temple, since all the Jews throughout the habitable earth, and those that worshipped God, nay, even those of Asia and Europe, sent their contributions to it, and this from very ancient times. Nor is the largeness of these sums without its attestation, nor is that greatness owing to our vanity, as raising it without ground to so great a height. But there are many witnesses to it, and particularly Strabo of Cappadocia, who says thus, quote, Mithridates sent to Cos, and took the money which Queen Cleopatra had deposited there, as also 800 talents belonging to the Jews. End quote. Now we have no public money, but only what appertains to God, and it is evident that the Asian Jews removed this money out of fear of Mithridates. For it is not probable that those of Judea, who had a strong city and temple, should send their money to Cos, nor is it likely that the Jews who are the inhabitants of Alexandria should do so neither, since they were in no fear of Mithridates. And Strabo himself bears witness to the same thing in another place, that at the same time that Sylla passed over into Greece, in order to fight against Mithridates, he sent Lucullus to put an end to a sedition that our nation, of whom the habitable earth is full, had raised in Cyrene, where he speaks thus, quote, There were 4 classes of men among those of Cyrene, that of citizens, that of husbandmen, the 3rd of strangers, and the 4th of Jews. Now these Jews are already gotten into all cities, and it is hard to find a place in the habitable earth that hath not admitted this tribe of men, and is not possessed by them. And it hath come to pass that Egypt and Cyrene, as having the same governors, and a great number of other nations, imitate their way of living, and maintain great bodies of these Jews in a peculiar manner, and grow up to greater prosperity with them, and make use of the same laws with that nation also. Accordingly, the Jews have places assigned them in Egypt, wherein they inhabit, besides what is peculiarly allotted to this nation at Alexandria, which is a large part of that city. There is also an ethnarch allowed them, who governs the nation, and distributes justice to them, and takes care of their contracts, and of the laws to them belonging, as if he were the ruler of a free republic. In Egypt, therefore, this nation is powerful, because the Jews were originally Egyptians, and because the land wherein they inhabit, since they went thence, is near to Egypt. They also removed into Cyrene, because that this land adjoined to the government of Egypt, as well as does Judea, or rather was formerly under the same government. End quote. And this is what Strabo says. So when Crassus had settled all things, as he himself pleased, he marched into Parthia, where both he himself and all his army perished, as hath been related elsewhere. But Cassius, as he fled from Rome to Syria, took possession of it, and was an impediment to the Parthians, who by reason of their victory over Crassus made incursions upon it. And as he came back to Tyre, he went up into Judea also, and fell upon Tariche, and presently took it, and carried about 30,000 Jews captives, and slew Pitholaus, who succeeded Aristobulus in his seditious practices, and that by the persuasion of Antipater, who proved to have great interest in him, and was at that time in great repute with the Idumeans also, out of which nation he married a wife, who was the daughter of one of their eminent men, and her name was Cypros, by whom he had 4 sons, Phasael and Herod, who was afterwards made king, and Joseph and Pheroras, and a daughter named Salome. This Antipater cultivated also a friendship and mutual kindness with other potentates, but especially with the king of Arabia, to whom he committed his children, while he fought against Aristobulus. So Cassius removed his camp, and marched to Euphrates, to meet those that were coming to attack him, as hath been related by others. But some time afterward Caesar, when he had taken Rome, and after Pompey and the Senate were fled beyond the Ionian Sea, freed Aristobulus from his bonds, and resolved to send him into Syria, and delivered 2 legions to him, that he might set matters right, as being a potent man in that country. But Aristobulus had no enjoyment of what he hoped for from the power that was given him by Caesar, for those of Pompey's party prevented it, and destroyed him by poison, and those of Caesar's party buried him. His dead body also lay for a good while embalmed in honey, till Antony afterward sent it to Judea, and caused him to be buried in the royal sepulchre. But Scipio, upon Pompey's sending to him to slay Alexander, the son of Aristobulus, because the young man was accused of what offenses he had been guilty of at first against the Romans, cut off his head, and thus did he die at Antioch. But Ptolemy, the son of Menneus, who was the ruler of Chalcis, under Mount Libanus, took his brethren to him, and sent his son Philippian to Ascalon to Aristobulus's wife, and desired her to send back with him her son Antigonus, and her daughters, the one of which, whose name was Alexandra, Philippian fell in love with, and married her, though afterward his father Ptolemy slew him, and married Alexandra, and continued to take care of her brethren. Chapter 8. The Jews become confederates with Caesar when he fought against Egypt. The glorious actions of Antipater, and his friendship with Caesar. The honors which the Jews received from the Romans and Athenians. Now after Pompey was dead, and after that victory Caesar had gained over him, Antipater, who managed the Jewish affairs, became very useful to Caesar when he made war against Egypt, and that by the order of Hyrcanus. For when Mithridates of Pergamus was bringing his auxiliaries, and was not able to continue his march through Pelusium, but obliged to stay at Ascalon, Antipater came to him, conducting 3,000 of the Jews, armed men. He had also taken care the principal men of the Arabians should come to his assistance, and on his account it was that all the Syrians assisted him also, as not willing to appear behindhand in their alacrity for Caesar, that is, Jamblichus the ruler, and Ptolemy his son, and Ptolemy the son of Sohemus, who dwelt at Mount Libanus, and almost all the cities. So Mithridates marched out of Syria, and came to Pelusium, and when its inhabitants would not admit him, he besieged the city. Now Antipater signalized himself here, and was the first who plucked down a part of the wall, and so opened a way to the rest, whereby they might enter the city, and by this means Pelusium was taken. But it happened that the Egyptian Jews, who dwelt in the country called Onion, would not let Antipater and Mithridates, with their soldiers, pass to Caesar. But Antipater persuaded them to come over with their party, because he was of the same people with them, and that chiefly by showing them the epistles of Hyrcanus the high priest, wherein he exhorted them to cultivate friendship with Caesar, and to supply his army with money and all sorts of provisions which they wanted. And accordingly, when they saw Antipater and the high priest of the same sentiments, they did as they were desired. And when the Jews about Memphis heard that these Jews were come over to Caesar, they also invited Mithridates to come to them. So he came, and received them also into his army. And when Mithridates had gone over all Delta, as the place is called, he came to a pitched battle with the enemy near the place called the Jewish camp. Now Mithridates had the right wing, and Antipater the left. And when it came to a fight, that wing where Mithridates was gave way, and was likely to suffer extremely, unless Antipater had come running to him with his own soldiers along the shore, when he had already beaten the enemy that opposed him. So he delivered Mithridates, and put those Egyptians who had been too hard for him to flight. He also took their camp, and continued in the pursuit of them. He also recalled Mithridates, who had been worsted, and was retired a great way off, of whose soldiers 800 fell, but of Antipater's 50. So Mithridates sent an account of this battle to Caesar, and openly declared that Antipater was the author of this victory, and of his own preservation, insomuch that Caesar commended Antipater then, and made use of him all the rest of that war in the most hazardous undertakings. He happened also to be wounded in one of those engagements. However, when Caesar, after some time, had finished that war, and was sailed away for Syria, he honored Antipater greatly, and confirmed Hyrcanus in the high priesthood, and bestowed on Antipater the privilege of a citizen of Rome, and a freedom from taxes everywhere. and it is reported by many that Hyrcanus went along with Antipater in this expedition, and came himself into Egypt. And Strabo of Cappadocia bears witness to this, when he says thus, in the name of Asinius, "After Mithridates had invaded Egypt, and with him Hyrcanus the high priest of the Jews." Nay, the same Strabo says thus again, in another place, in the name of Hypsicrates, that "Mithridates at first went out alone, but that Antipater, who had the care of the Jewish affairs, was called by him to Ascalon, and that he had gotten ready 3,000 soldiers to go along with him, and encouraged other governors of the country to go along with him also, and that Hyrcanus the high priest was also present in this expedition." This is what Strabo says. But Antigonus, the son of Aristobulus, came at this time to Caesar, and lamented his father's fate, and complained that it was by Antipater's means that Aristobulus was taken off by poison, and his brother was beheaded by Scipio, and desired that he should take pity of him who had been ejected out of that principality which was due to him. He also accused Hyrcanus and Antipater as governing the nation by violence, and offering injuries to himself. Antipater was present, and made his defense as to the accusations that were laid against him. He demonstrated that Antigonus and his party were given to innovation, and were seditious persons. He also put Caesar in mind what difficult services he had undergone when he assisted him in his wars, and discoursed about what he was a witness of himself. He added that Aristobulus was justly carried away to Rome, as one that was an enemy to the Romans, and could never be brought to be a friend to them, and that his brother had no more than he deserved from Scipio, as being seized in committing robberies, and that this punishment was not inflicted on him in a way of violence or injustice by him that did it. When Antipater had made this speech, Caesar appointed Hyrcanus to be high priest, and gave Antipater what principality he himself should choose, leaving the determination to himself. So he made him procurator of Judea. He also gave Hyrcanus leave to raise up the walls of his own city, upon his asking that favor of him, for they had been demolished by Pompey. And this grant he sent to the consuls of Rome, to be engraven on the Capitol. The decree of the Senate was this that follows. Lucius Valerius, the son of Lucius the Praetor, referred this to the Senate, upon the Ides of December, in the Temple of Concord. There were present at the writing of this decree Lucius Coponius, the son of Lucius of the Colline tribe, and Papirius of the Quirine tribe, concerning the affairs which Alexander, the son of Jason, and Numenius, the son of Antiochus, and Alexander, the son of Dositheus, ambassadors of the Jews, good and worthy men, proposed, who came to renew that league of goodwill and friendship with the Romans which was in being before. They also brought a shield of gold, as a mark of confederacy, valued at 50,000 pieces of gold, and desired that letters might be given them, directed both to the free cities and to the kings, that their country and their havens might be at peace, and that no one among them might receive any injury. It therefore pleased the Senate to make a league of friendship and goodwill with them, and to bestow on them whatsoever they stood in need of, and to accept of the shield which was brought by them. This was done in the 9th year of Hyrcanus the high priest and ethnarch, in the month Panemus. Hyrcanus also received honors from the people of Athens, as having been useful to them on many occasions. And when they wrote to him, they sent him this decree, as it here follows. Under the Prutania and priesthood of Dionysius, the son of Aesculapius, on the 5th day of the latter part of the month Panemus, this decree of the Athenians was given to their commanders, when Agathocles was archon, and Eucles, the son of Menander of Alamusia, was the scribe. In the month Munichion, on the 11th day of the Prutania, a council of the presidents was held in the theater. Dorotheus the high priest, and the fellow presidents with him, put it to the vote of the people. Dionysius, the son of Dionysius, gave the sentence. since Hyrcanus, the son of Alexander, the high priest and ethnarch of the Jews, continues to bear good will to our people in general, and to every one of our citizens in particular, and treats them with all sorts of kindness, and when any of the Athenians come to him, either as ambassadors or on any occasion of their own, he receives them in an obliging manner, and sees that they are conducted back in safety, of which we have had several former testimonies, it is now also decreed, at the report of Theodosius, the son of Theodorus, and upon his putting the people in mind of the virtue of this man, and that his purpose is to do us all the good that is in his power, to honor him with a crown of gold, the usual reward according to the law, and to erect his statue in brass in the temple of Demus and of the Graces; and that this present of a crown shall be proclaimed publicly in the theater in the Dionysian shows, while the new tragedies are acting, and in the Panathenean and Eleusinian and gymnical shows also; and that the commanders shall take care, while he continues in his friendship and perseveres his good will to us, to return all possible honor and favor to the man for his affection and generosity, that by this treatment it may appear how our people receive the good kindly, and repay them a suitable reward, and he may be induced to proceed in his affection towards us by the honors we have already paid him; that ambassadors be also chosen out of all the Athenians, who shall carry this decree to him, and desire him to accept of the honors we do him, and to endeavor always to be doing some good to our city." And this shall suffice us to have spoken as to the honors that were paid by the Romans and the people of Athens to Hyrcanus. End of Book 14, chapters 7 and 8. Book 14, Chapter 9 of the Antiquities of the Jews, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Antiquities of the Jews, Volume 3, by Flavius Josephus. Translated by William Whiston. Book 14. Chapter 9. How Antipater committed the care of Galilee to Herod, and that of Jerusalem to Phasaelus; as also how Herod upon the Jews' envy at Antipater was accused before Hyrcanus. Now when Caesar had settled the affairs of Syria, he sailed away; and as soon as Antipater had conducted Caesar out of Syria, he returned to Judea. He then immediately raised up the wall which had been thrown down by Pompey, and, by coming thither, he pacified that tumult which had been in the country, and this by both threatening and advising them to be quiet; for that if they would be of Hyrcanus's side, they would live happily, and lead their lives without disturbance and in the enjoyment of their own possessions; but if they were addicted to the hopes of what might come by innovation, and aimed to get wealth thereby, they should have him a severe master instead of a gentle governor, and Hyrcanus a tyrant instead of a king, and the Romans, together with Caesar, their bitter enemies instead of rulers, for that they would never bear him to be set aside whom they had appointed to govern. And when Antipater had said this to them, he himself settled the affairs of this country. And seeing that Hyrcanus was of a slow and slothful temper, he made Phasaelus, his eldest son, governor of Jerusalem and of the places that were about it, but committed Galilee to Herod, his next son, who was then a very young man, for he was but 15 years of age. But that youth of his was no impediment to him, but as he was a youth of great mind, he presently met with an opportunity of signalizing his courage; for finding that there was one Hezekiah, a captain of a band of robbers, who overran the neighboring parts of Syria with a great troop of them, he seized him and slew him, as well as a great number of the other robbers that were with him, for which action he was greatly beloved by the Syrians; for when they were very desirous to have their country freed from this nest of robbers, he purged it of them. So they sung songs in his commendation in their villages and cities, as having procured them peace and the secure enjoyment of their possessions; and on this account it was that he became known to Sextus Caesar, who was a relation of the great Caesar, and was now president of Syria. Now Phasaelus, Herod's brother, was moved with emulation at his actions, and envied the fame he had thereby gotten, and became ambitious not to be behindhand with him in deserving it. So he made the inhabitants of Jerusalem bear him the greatest good will while he held the city himself, but did neither manage its affairs improperly, nor abuse his authority therein. This conduct procured from the nation to Antipater such respect as is due to kings, and such honors as he might partake of if he were an absolute lord of the country. Yet did not this splendor of his, as frequently happens, in the least diminish in him that kindness and fidelity which he owed to Hyrcanus. But now the principal men among the Jews, when they saw Antipater and his sons to grow so much in the good will the nation bare to them, and in the revenues which they received out of Judea, and out of Hyrcanus's own wealth, they became ill disposed to him. For indeed Antipater had contracted a friendship with the Roman emperors, and when he had prevailed with Hyrcanus to send them money, he took it to himself, and purloined the present intended, and sent it as if it were his own, and not Hyrcanus's gift to them. Hyrcanus heard of this his management, but took no care about it; nay, he rather was very glad of it. But the chief men of the Jews were therefore in fear, because they saw that Herod was a violent and bold man, and very desirous of acting tyrannically. So they came to Hyrcanus, and now accused Antipater openly, and said to him, How long wilt thou be quiet under such actions as are now done? Or dost thou not see that Antipater and his sons have already seized upon the government, and that it is only the name of a king which is given thee? But do not thou suffer these things to be hidden from thee, nor do thou think to escape danger by being so careless of thyself and of thy kingdom. For Antipater and his sons are not now stewards of thine affairs. Do not thou deceive thyself with such a notion. They are evidently absolute lords, for Herod, Antipater's son, hath slain Hezekiah, and those that were with him, and hath thereby transgressed our law, which hath forbidden to slay any man, even though he were a wicked man, unless he had been first condemned to suffer death by the Sanhedrin, yet hath he been so insolent as to do this, and that without any authority from thee. Upon Hyrcanus hearing this, he complied with them. The mothers also of those that had been slain by Herod raised his indignation. For those women continued every day in the temple, persuading the king and the people that Herod might undergo a trial before the Sanhedrim for what he had done. Hyrcanus was so moved by these complaints that he summoned Herod to come to his trial for what was charged upon him. Accordingly he came, but his father had persuaded him to come not like a private man, but with a guard, for the security of his person, and that when he had settled the affairs of Galilee in the best manner he could for his own advantage, he should come to his trial, but still with a body of men sufficient for his security on his journey, yet so that he should not come with so great a force as might look like terrifying Hyrcanus, but still such a one as might not expose him naked and unguarded to his enemies. However, Sextus Caesar, president of Syria, wrote to Hyrcanus, and desired him to clear Herod, and dismiss him at his trial, and threatened him beforehand if he did not do it. Which epistle of his was the occasion of Hyrcanus delivering Herod from suffering any harm from the Sanhedrim, for he loved him as his own son. But when Herod stood before the Sanhedrim, with his body of men about him, he affrighted them all, and no one of his former accusers durst after that bring any charge against him, but there was deep silence, and nobody knew what was to be done. When affairs stood thus, one whose name was Samaeus, a righteous man he was, and for that reason above all fear, rose up and said, O you that are assessors with me, and O thou that art our king, I neither have ever myself known such a case, nor do I suppose that any one of you can name its parallel, that one who is called to take his trial by us ever stood in such a manner before us. But every one, whosoever he be, that comes to be tried by this Sanhedrim, presents himself in a submissive manner, and like one that is in fear of himself, and that endeavors to move us to compassion, with his hair disheveled, and in a black and mourning garment. But this admirable man Herod, who is accused of murder, and called to answer so heavy an accusation, stands here clothed in purple, and with the hair of his head finely trimmed, and with his armed men about him, that if we shall condemn him by our law, he may slay us, and by overbearing justice may himself escape death. Yet do not I make this complaint against Herod himself. He is, to be sure, more concerned for himself than for the laws. But my complaint is against yourselves and your king, who gave him a license so to do. However, take you notice that God is great, and that this very man, whom you are going to absolve and dismiss, for the sake of Hyrcanus, will one day punish both you and your king himself also. Nor did Samaeus mistake in any part of this prediction. For when Herod had received the kingdom, he slew all the members of this Sanhedrim, and Hyrcanus himself also, excepting Samaeus, for he had a great honor for him on account of his righteousness, and because, when the city was afterward besieged by Herod and Sosius, he persuaded the people to admit Herod into it, and told them that for their sins they would not be able to escape his hands, which things will be related by us in their proper places. But when Hyrcanus saw that the members of the Sanhedrim were ready to pronounce the sentence of death upon Herod, he put off the trial to another day, and sent privately to Herod, and advised him to fly out of the city, for that by this means he might escape. So he retired to Damascus, as though he fled from the king. And when he had been with Sextus Caesar, and had put his own affairs in a sure posture, he resolved to do thus: that in case he were again summoned before the Sanhedrim to take his trial, he would not obey that summons. Hereupon the members of the Sanhedrim had great indignation at this posture of affairs, and endeavored to persuade Hyrcanus that all these things were against him, which state of matters he was not ignorant of, but his temper was so unmanly and so foolish that he was able to do nothing at all. But when Sextus had made Herod general of the army of Celesyria, for he sold him that post for money, Hyrcanus was in fear lest Herod should make war upon him. Nor was the effect of what he feared long in coming upon him, for Herod came and brought an army along with him to fight with Hyrcanus, as being angry at the trial he had been summoned to undergo before the Sanhedrim. But his father Antipater and his brother Phasaelus met him, and hindered him from assaulting Jerusalem. They also pacified his vehement temper, and persuaded him to do no overt action, but only to affright them with threatenings, and to proceed no further against one who had given him the dignity he had. They also desired him not only to be angry that he was summoned, and obliged to come to his trial, but to remember withal how he was dismissed without condemnation, and how he ought to give Hyrcanus thanks for the same, and that he was not to regard only what was disagreeable to him, and be unthankful for his deliverance. So they desired him to consider, that since it is God that turns the scales of war, there is great uncertainty in the issue of battles, and that therefore he ought of to expect the victory when he should fight with his king, and him that had supported him, and bestowed many benefits upon him, and had done nothing itself very severe to him. For that his accusation, which was derived from evil counselors, and not from himself, had rather the suspicion of some severity than anything really severe in it. Herod was persuaded by these arguments, and believed that it was sufficient for his future hopes to have made a show of his strength before the nation, and done no more to it. And in this state were the affairs of Judea at this time. End of Book 14, Chapter 9. Book 14, Chapter 10 of the Antiquities of the Jews, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Antiquities of the Jews, Volume 3, by Flavius Josephus, translated by William Whiston. Book 14, Chapter 10. The honors that were paid the Jews, and the leagues that were made by the Romans and other nations with them. Now when Caesar was come to Rome, he was ready to sail into Africa to fight against Scipio and Cato, when Hyrcanus sent ambassadors to him, and by them desired that he would ratify that league of friendship and mutual alliance which was between them. And it seems to me to be necessary here to give an account of all the honors that the Romans and their emperor paid to our nation, and of the leagues of mutual assistance they have made with it, that all the rest of mankind may know what regard the kings of Asia and Europe have had to us, and that they have been abundantly satisfied of our courage and fidelity. For whereas many will not believe what hath been written about us by the Persians and Macedonians, because those writings are not everywhere to be met with, nor do lie in public places, but among us ourselves, and certain other barbarous nations, while there is no contradiction to be made against the decrees of the Romans, for they are laid up in the public places of the cities, and are extant still in the Capitol, and engraven upon pillars of brass. Nay, besides this, Julius Caesar made a pillar of brass for the Jews at Alexandria, and declared publicly that they were citizens of Alexandria. Out of these evidences will I demonstrate what I say, and will now set down the decrees made both by the Senate and by Julius Caesar, which relate to Hyrcanus and to our nation. Caius Julius Caesar, Imperator and High Priest, and Dictator the second time, to the magistrates, Senate, and people of Sidon, sendeth greeting. If you be in health, it is well. I also and the army are well. I have sent you a copy of that decree, registered on the tables, which concerns Hyrcanus, the son of Alexander, the high priest and ethnarch of the Jews, that it may be laid up among the public records. And I will that it be openly proposed in a table of brass, both in Greek and in Latin. It is as follows. I, Julius Caesar, Imperator the second time, and High Priest, have made this decree with the approbation of the Senate, whereas Hyrcanus, the son of Alexander the Jew, hath demonstrated his fidelity and diligence about our affairs, and this both now and in former times, both in peace and in war, as many of our generals have borne witness, and come to our assistance in the last Alexandrian war with 1,500 soldiers, and when he was sent by me to Mithridates, showed himself superior in valor to all the rest of that army. For these reasons I will that Hyrcanus, the son of Alexander, and his children, be ethnarchs of the Jews, and have the high priesthood of the Jews forever, according to the customs of their forefathers, and that he and his sons be our confederates, and that besides this, every one of them be reckoned among our particular friends. I also ordain that he and his children retain whatsoever privileges belong to the office of high priest, or whatsoever favors have been hitherto granted them. And if at any time hereafter there arise any questions about the Jewish customs, I will that he determine the same. And I think it not proper that they should be obliged to find us winter quarters, or that any money should be required of them. The decrees of Caius Caesar, consul, containing what hath been granted and determined, are as follows. That Hyrcanus and his children bear rule over the nation of the Jews, and have the profits of the places to them bequeathed. And that he, as himself the high priest and ethnarch of the Jews, defend those that are injured. And that ambassadors be sent to Hyrcanus, the son of Alexander, the high priest of the Jews, that may discourse with him about a league of friendship and mutual assistance, and that a table of brass, containing the premises, be openly proposed in the Capitol, and at Sidon, and Tyre, and Ascalon, and in the temple, engraven in Roman and Greek letters, that this decree may also be communicated to the quaestors and praetors of the several cities, and to the friends of the Jews, and that the ambassadors may have presents made them, and that these decrees be sent everywhere." Caius Caesar, Imperator, Dictator, Consul, hath granted, that out of regard to the honor and virtue and kindness of the man, and for the advantage of the Senate and of the people of Rome, Hyrcanus, the son of Alexander, both he and his children, be high priests and priests of Jerusalem and of the Jewish nation, by the same right, and according to the same laws, by which their progenitors have held the priesthood. Caius Caesar, consul the 5th time, hath decreed, that the Jews shall possess Jerusalem, and may encompass that city with walls, and that Hyrcanus, the son of Alexander, the high priest and ethnarch of the Jews, retain it in the manner he himself pleases, and that the Jews be allowed to deduct out of their tribute every 2nd year the land is let, in the Sabbatic period, a chorus of that tribute, and that the tribute they pay be not let to farm, nor that they pay always the same tribute. Caius Caesar, Imperator, the 2nd time, hath ordained that all the country of the Jews, excepting Joppa, do pay a tribute yearly for the city Jerusalem, excepting the 7th, which they call the Sabbatical year, because thereon they neither receive the fruits of their trees, nor do they sow their land; and that they pay their tribute in Sidon in the 2nd year of that Sabbatical period, the 4th part of what was sown; and besides this, they are to pay the same tithes to Hyrcanus and his sons, which they paid to their forefathers; and that no one, neither president, nor lieutenant, nor ambassador, raise auxiliaries within the bounds of Judea; nor may soldiers exact money of them for winter quarters, or under any other pretense; but that they be free from all sorts of injuries; and that whatsoever they shall hereafter have, and are in possession of, or have bought, they shall retain them all. It is also our pleasure that the city Joppa, which the Jews had originally, when they made a league of friendship with the Romans, shall belong to them as it formerly did, and that Hyrcanus, the son of Alexander, and his sons, have as tribute of that city from those that occupy the land for the country, and for what they export every year to Sidon, 20,675 modii every year, the 7th year, which they call the Sabbatic year, excepted, whereupon they neither plow nor receive the product of their trees. It is also the pleasure of the Senate, that as to the villages which are in the great plain, which Hyrcanus and his forefathers formerly possessed, Hyrcanus and the Jews have them with the same privileges with which they formerly had them also; and that the same original ordinances remain still in force which concern the Jews with regard to their high priests; and that they enjoy the same benefits which they had formerly by the concession of the people and of the Senate; and let them enjoy the like privileges in Lydda. It is the pleasure also of the Senate that Hyrcanus the ethnarch and the Jews retain those places, countries, and villages which belonged to the kings of Syria and Phoenicia, the confederates of the Romans, and which they had bestowed on them as their free gifts. It is also granted to Hyrcanus and to his sons, and to the ambassadors by them sent to us, that in the fights between single gladiators, and in those with beasts, they shall sit among the senators to see those shows; and that when they desire an audience, they shall be introduced into the Senate by the dictator, or by the general of the horse; and when they have introduced them, their answers shall be returned them in 10 days at the furthest, after the decree of the Senate is made about their affairs. Caius Caesar, Imperator, Dictator the 4th time, and Consul the 5th time, declared to be a perpetual dictator, made this speech concerning the rights and privileges of Hyrcanus, the son of Alexander, the high priest and ethnarch of the Jews; since those imperators that have been in the provinces before me have borne witness to Hyrcanus, the high priest of the Jews, and to the Jews themselves, and this before the Senate and people of Rome, when the people and Senate returned their thanks to them, it is good that we now also remember the same, and provide that a requital be made to Hyrcanus, to the nation of the Jews, and to the sons of Hyrcanus, by the Senate and people of Rome, and that suitably to what good will they have shown us, and to the benefits they have bestowed upon us." Julius Caius, praetor, consul of Rome, to the magistrates, senate, and people of the Parians, sendeth greeting. The Jews of Delos, and some other Jews that sojourn there, in the presence of your ambassadors, signified to us, that, by a decree of yours, you forbid them to make use of the customs of their forefathers, and their way of sacred worship. Now it does not please me that such decrees should be made against our friends and confederates, whereby they are forbidden to live according to their own customs, or to bring in contributions for common suppers and holy festivals, while they are not forbidden so to do even at Rome itself. For even Caius Caesar, our imperator and consul, in that decree wherein he forbade the Bacchanal rioters to meet in the city, did yet permit these Jews, and these only, both to bring in their contributions, and to make their common suppers. Accordingly, when I forbid other Bacchanal rioters, I permit these Jews to gather themselves together, according to the customs and laws of their forefathers, and to persist therein. It will be therefore good for you, that if you have made any decree against these our friends and confederates, to abrogate the same, by reason of their virtue and kind disposition towards us." Now after Caius was slain, when Marcus Antonius and Publius Dolabella were consuls, they both assembled the Senate, and introduced Hyrcanus's ambassadors to it, and discoursed of what they desired, and made a league of friendship with them. The Senate also decreed to grant them all they desired. I add the decree itself, that those who read the present work may have ready by them a demonstration of the truth of what we say. The decree was this: "The decree of the Senate copied out of the treasury from the public tables belonging to the quaestors, when Quintus Rutilius and Caius Cornelius were quaestors, and taken out of the second table of the first class, on the 3rd day before the Ides of April, in the temple of Concord. There were present at the writing of this decree Lucius Calpurnius Piso of the Menenian tribe, Servius Papinins Potidus of the Lemonian tribe, Caius Caninius Rebellius of the Tarentine tribe, Publius Tidetius, Lucius Apulinus, the son of Lucius, of the Sergian tribe, Flavius the son of Lucius of the Lemonian tribe, Publius Platins the son of Publius of the Papyrian tribe, Marcus Acilius the son of Marcus of the Messian tribe, Lucius Erusius, the son of Lucius, of the Stellantine tribe, Marius Quintus Plancillus, the son of Marcus, of the Polonian tribe, and Publius Serius. Publius Dolabella and Marcus Antonius, the consuls, made this reference to the Senate, that as to those things which, by the decree of the Senate, Caius Caesar had adjudged about the Jews, and yet had not hitherto that decree been brought into the treasury, it is our will, as it is also the desire of Publius Dolabella and Marcus Antonius, our consuls, to have these decrees put into the public tables, and brought to the city quaestors, that they may take care to have them put upon the double tables. This was done before the 5th of the Ides of February, in the temple of Concord. Now the ambassadors from Hyrcanus the high priest were these: Lysimachus the son of Pausanias, Alexander the son of Theodorus, Patroclus the son of Chereas, and Jonathan the son of Onias." Hyrcanus sent also one of these ambassadors to Dolabella, who was then the prefect of Asia, and desired him to dismiss the Jews from military services, and to preserve to them the customs of their forefathers, and to permit them to live according to them. And when Dolabella had received Hyrcanus's letter, without any further deliberation, he sent an epistle to all the Asiatics, and particularly to the city of the Ephesians, the metropolis of Asia, about the Jews, a copy of which epistle here follows. Quote, When Artermon was Prytanis, on the first day of the month Leneon, Dolabella, imperator, to the senate and magistrates and people of the Ephesians, sendeth greeting. Alexander, the son of Theodorus, the ambassador of Hyrcanus, the son of Alexander, the high priest and ethnarch of the Jews, appeared before me to show that his countrymen could not go into their armies, because they are not allowed to bear arms, or to travel on Sabbath days, nor there to procure themselves those sorts of food which they have been used to eat from the times of their forefathers. I do therefore grant them a freedom from going into the army, as the former prefects have done, and permit them to use the customs of their forefathers in assembling together for sacred and religious purposes, as their law requires, and for collecting oblations necessary for sacrifices. And my will is, that you write this to the several cities under your jurisdiction. End quote. And these were the concessions that Dolabella made to our nation when Hyrcanus sent an embassage to him. But Lucius the consul's decree ran thus. Quote, I have at my tribunal set these Jews, who are citizens of Rome and follow the Jewish religious rites, and yet live at Ephesus, free from going into the army, on account of the superstition they are under. This was done before the 12th of the calends of October, when Lucius Lentulus and Caius Marcellus were consuls, in the presence of Titus Appius Balgus, the son of Titus, and lieutenant of the Horatian tribe, of Titus Tongans, the son of Titus, of the Crustumine tribe, of Quintus Resius, the son of Quintus, of Titus Pompeius Longinus, the son of Titus, of Caius Servilius, the son of Caius, of the Tarentine tribe, of Brachus the military tribune, of Publius Lucius Gallus, the son of Publius, of the Venturan tribe, of Caius Sentins, the son of Caius, of the Sabbatine tribe, of Titus Attilius Bulbus, the son of Titus, lieutenant and vice praetor to the magistrates, senate, and people of the Ephesians, sendeth greeting. Lucius Lentulus, the consul, freed the Jews that are in Asia from going into the armies at my intercession for them, and when I had made the same petition some time afterward to Phanius the imperator, and to Lucius Antonius the vice quaestor, I obtained the privilege of them also, and my will is, that you take care that no one give them any disturbance. End quote. The decree of the Delians. Quote, The answer of the praetors, when Beotus was archon, on the 20th day of the month Thargelion, while Marcus Piso the lieutenant lived in our city, who was also appointed over the choice of the soldiers, he called us, and many other of the citizens, and gave order, that if there be here any Jews who are Roman citizens, no one is to give them any disturbance about going into the army, because Cornelius Lentulus, the consul, freed the Jews from going into the army, on account of the superstition they were under. You are therefore obliged to submit to the praetor. End quote. And the like decree was made by the Sardians about us also. Quote, Caius Phanius, the son of Caius, imperator and consul, to the magistrates of Cos, sendeth greeting. I would have you know that the ambassadors of the Jews have been with me, and desired they might have those decrees which the Senate had made about them, which decrees are here subjoined. My will is, that you have a regard to and take care of these men, according to the Senate's decree, that they may be safely conveyed home through your country. End quote. The declaration of Lucius Lentulus the consul. Quote, I have dismissed those Jews who are Roman citizens, and who appear to me to have their religious rights, and to observe the laws of the Jews at Ephesus, on account of the superstition they are under. This act was done before the 13th of the calends of October. End quote. Quote, Lucius Antonius, the son of Marcus vice quaestor and vice praetor, to the magistrates, senate, and people of the Sardians, sendeth greeting. Those Jews that are our fellow citizens of Rome came to me, and demonstrated that they had an assembly of their own, according to the laws of their forefathers, and this from the beginning, as also a place of their own, wherein they determined their suits and controversies with one another. Upon their petition, therefore, to me, that these might be lawful for them, I gave order that these their privileges be preserved, and they be permitted to do accordingly." The declaration of Marcus Publius, the son of Spurius, and of Marcus, the son of Marcus, and of Lucius, the son of Publius. "We went to the proconsul, and informed him of what Dositheus, the son of Cleopatrida of Alexandria, desired, that, if he thought good, he would dismiss those Jews who were Roman citizens, and were wont to observe the rites of the Jewish religion, on account of the superstition they were under. Accordingly, he did dismiss them. This was done before the 13th of the calends of October." "In the month Quintius, when Lucius Lentulus and Caius Marcellus were consuls, and there were present Titus Appius Balbus, the son of Titus, lieutenant of the Horatian tribe, Titus Tongius of the Crustumine tribe, Quintus Resius, the son of Quintus, Titus Pompeius, the son of Titus, Cornelius Longinus, Caius Servilius Brachus, the son of Caius, a military tribune, of the Tarentine tribe, Publius Clusius Gallus, the son of Publius, of the Venturan tribe, Caius Tudius, the son of Caius, a militial tribune, of the Emilian tribe, Sextus Attilius Serranus, the son of Sextus, of the Esquiline tribe, Caius Pompeius, the son of Caius, of the Sabbatine tribe, Titus Appius Menander, the son of Titus, Publius Servilius Strabo, the son of Publius, Lucius Passius Capito, the son of Lucius, of the Colline tribe, Aulus Furius Tertius, the son of Aulus, and Appius Menus. In the presence of these it was that Lentulus pronounced this decree: I have before the tribunal dismissed those Jews that are Roman citizens, and are accustomed to observe the sacred rites of the Jews at Ephesus, on account of the superstition they are under." "The magistrates of the Laodiceans to Caius Rubilius, the son of Caius, the consul, sendeth greeting. Sopater, the ambassador of Hyrcanus the high priest, hath delivered us an epistle from thee, whereby he lets us know that certain ambassadors were come from Hyrcanus, the high priest of the Jews, and brought an epistle written concerning their nation, wherein they desire that the Jews may be allowed to observe their Sabbaths and other sacred rites, according to the laws of their forefathers, and that they may be under no command, because they are our friends and confederates, and that nobody may injure them in our provinces. Now although the Trallians there present contradicted them, and were not pleased with these decrees, yet didst thou give order that they should be observed, and informedst us that thou hast been desired to write this to us about them. We therefore, in obedience to the injunctions we have received from thee, have received the epistle which thou sentest us, and have laid it up by itself among our public records. And as to the other things about which thou didst send to us, we will take care that no complaint be made against us." "Publius Servilius, the son of Publius of the Galban tribe, the proconsul, to the magistrates, senate, and people of the Milesians, sendeth greeting. Pretanes, the son of Hermes, a citizen of yours, came to me when I was at Tralles, and held court there, and informed me that you used the Jews in a way different from my opinion, and forbade them to celebrate their Sabbaths, and to perform the sacred rites received from their forefathers, and to manage the fruits of the land according to their ancient custom; and that he had himself been the promulger of your decree, according as your laws require. I would therefore have you know that upon hearing the pleadings on both sides, I gave sentence that the Jews should not be prohibited to make use of their own customs." The decree of those of Pergamus. when Cratippus was Prytanis, on the first day of the month Decius, the decree of the praetors was this: since the Romans, following the conduct of their ancestors, undertake dangers for the common safety of all mankind, and are ambitious to settle their confederates and friends in happiness and in firm peace, and since the nation of the Jews and their high priest Hyrcanus sent as ambassadors to them Strato the son of Theodotus, and Apollonius the son of Alexander, and Ennius the son of Antipater, and Aristobulus the son of Amyntas, and Sosipater the son of Philip, worthy and good men, who gave a particular account of their affairs, the Senate thereupon made a decree about what they had desired of them, that Antiochus the king, the son of Antiochus, should do no injury to the Jews, the confederates of the Romans, and that the fortresses, and the havens, and the country, and whatever else he had taken from them, should be restored to them, and that it may be lawful for them to export their goods out of their own havens, and that no king nor people may have leave to export any goods, either out of the country of Judea, or out of their havens, without paying customs, but only Ptolemy the king of Alexandria, because he is our confederate and friend, and that, according to their desire, the garrison that is in Joppa may be ejected. Now Lucius Pettius, one of our senators, a worthy and good man, gave order that we should take care that these things should be done according to the Senate's decree, and that we should take care also that their ambassadors might return home in safety. Accordingly, we admitted Theodorus into our Senate and assembly, and took the epistle out his hands, as well as the decree of the Senate. And as he discoursed with great zeal about the Jews, and described Hyrcanus's virtue and generosity, and how he was a benefactor to all men in common, and particularly to everybody that comes to him, we laid up the epistle in our public records, and made a decree ourselves, that since we also are in confederacy with the Romans, we would do everything we could for the Jews according to the Senate's decree. Theodorus also, who brought the epistle, desired of our praetors that they would send Hyrcanus a copy of that decree, as also ambassadors, to signify to him the affection of our people to him, and to exhort them to preserve and augment their friendship for us, and be ready to bestow other benefits upon us, as justly expecting to receive proper requitals from us, and desiring them to remember that our ancestors were friendly to the Jews even in the days of Abraham, who was the father of all the Hebrews, as we have also found it set down in our public records. End quote. The decree of those of Halicarnassus. Quote, when Memnon, the son of Orestes by descent, but by adoption of Euonymus, was priest, on the blank day of the month Aristerion, the decree of the people, upon the representation of Marcus Alexander, was this: since we have ever a great regard to piety towards God and to holiness, and since we aim to follow the people of the Romans, who are the benefactors of all men, and what they have written to us about a league of friendship and mutual assistance between the Jews and our city, and that their sacred offices and accustomed festivals and assemblies may be observed by them, we have decreed that as many men and women of the Jews as are willing so to do may celebrate their Sabbaths, and perform their holy offices according to Jewish laws, and may make their prosuche at the seaside according to the customs of their forefathers. And if any one, whether he be a magistrate or a private person, hindereth them from so doing, he shall be liable to a fine to be applied to the uses of the city. End quote. The decree of the Sardians. Quote, this decree was made by the Senate and people upon the representation of the praetors. Whereas those Jews who are fellow citizens and live with us in this city have ever had great benefits heaped upon them by the people, and have come now into the Senate and desired of the people that upon the restitution of their law and their liberty by the Senate and people of Rome they may assemble together according to their ancient legal custom, and that we will not bring any suit against them about it, and that a place may be given them where they may have their congregations, with their wives and children, and may offer, as did their forefathers, their prayers and sacrifices to God. Now the Senate and people have decreed to permit them to assemble together on the days formerly appointed, and to act according to their own laws, and that such a place be set apart for them by the praetors, for the building and inhabiting the same, as they shall esteem fit for that purpose; and that those that take care of the provision for the city shall take care that such sorts of food as they esteem fit for their eating may be imported into the city." End quote. The decree of the Ephesians. When Monophilus was Prytanis, on the first day of the month Artemisius, this decree was made by the people. Nicanor, the son of Euphemus, pronounced it, upon the representation of the praetors. Since the Jews that dwell in this city have petitioned Marcus Julius Pompeius, the son of Brutus, the proconsul, that they might be allowed to observe their Sabbaths, and to act in all things according to the customs of their forefathers, without impediment from anybody, the praetor hath granted their petition. Accordingly, it was decreed by the Senate and people that in this affair that concerned the Romans, no one of them should be hindered from keeping the Sabbath day, nor be fined for so doing, but that they may be allowed to do all things according to their own laws. End quote. Now there are many such decrees of the Senate and Imperators of the Romans, and those different from these before us, which have been made in favor of Hyrcanus and of our nation; as also there have been more decrees of the cities, and rescripts of the praetors, to such epistles as concerned our rights and privileges. And certainly such as are not ill disposed to what we write may believe that they are all to this purpose, and that by the specimens which we have inserted. For since we have produced evident marks that may still be seen of the friendship we have had with the Romans, and demonstrated that those marks are engraven upon columns and tables of brass in the Capitol, that acts still in being, and preserved to this day, we have omitted to set them all down, as needless and disagreeable. For I cannot suppose any one so perverse as not to believe the friendship we have had with the Romans, while they have demonstrated the same by such a great number of their decrees relating to us; nor will they doubt of our fidelity as to the rest of those decrees, since we have shown the same in those we have produced, and thus have we sufficiently explained that friendship and confederacy we at those times had with the Romans. End of Book 14, Chapter 10.